I am going to be ostracized at work for this one. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy. My name is Crispin. We have a program here aimed at new and aspiring government officials wanting to have a successful public sector career, but also for just members of the public who want to understand how government works. And one of the most common questions I'm asked in that regard is, just as an ordinary person, no major political connections, how can I influence government policy and affect change? Now, I have my top 5 tips, and I'm putting some contours around that, and that assumes that you want to be as efficient and effective with your time as possible. Okay, so what is the most pragmatic strategies for changing government policy? And so there are plenty of things that are useful but aren't at an individual level as effective. And I would say protesting is the top of that list, right? And I'll come back to why that is. But let's launch straight into it. Coming in at number 5, write to your member of parliament or the agency responsible, or both. Absolutely write a letter. This seems very anodyne, and your first reaction might be like, "What? Nothing's going to happen." Well, actually, it does, and people just underestimate massively how much impact simple letters from members of the public have on the way government perceives certain issues. So I'll give you an example. Whenever a letter comes into a public agency in Australia and most parts of the world, it will go to a fairly junior official who will process it, record it, maybe write up some a first attempt response. But then that letter and response goes right up the chain of the agency, often straight to the minister. So it'll go from the junior official, it'll go to their supervisor, their line manager, who will make some changes, send it back, it'll go up and down a bit, and then it'll go to the assistant secretary, the secretary, and often the minister themselves, right? It goes right through the chain. So your single letter might have 20 senior people looking at it, all discussing it and generating conversation internally about how best to deal with the issue and how best to respond. And if they get enough letters of that kind, or if your letter is particularly interesting and insightful, then you can single-handedly affect government change on that particular issue. So if you care about something, don't be shy. One of the most effective ways to affect change is to write to the minister or the agency. This is actually something you absolutely should do. Coming in at number 4, sign or create a petition. A petition is much more effective than protesting. Protesting is useful if you are talking millions of people and your massive national revolutionary change, right? But for an individual subject, a petition is far more effective. And the reason for that is, first of all, there is a unified message. When you go to a protest, people are showing different types of banners with different slogans. They might all be there for the same reason, but often the protest is only as successful as the least disruptive person. It only takes one person to color it for the rest of them. The media will report on the protest in different slants according to their own ideological approach, whereas a petition doesn't have any of those problems. You have a unified message, you have signed people who are on the electoral roll, and the thing about a petition is it's often not, activists. Politicians can often ignore people if it's thought to be just from a group that will never support them, right? But if it's from their ordinary electors who have put their name to something and want to see a particular change, politicians take that a lot more seriously. And also if you have a petition with 50,000 signatures, you can hold that up in Parliament and say, look, what are we going to do for these voters? So this is a very effective mechanism for affecting change, much more so than people think. It's actually an extremely useful record to have as well. And then in some jurisdictions, it actually has legal force. So in the United Kingdom, for example, if you get 10,000 signatures, you will get a formal government response, right? Which may actually be, we agree and we're going to change our policy. And if you get 100,000 signatures, you force a debate on the House of Commons, right? So you get the 100,000 signatures and then the parliamentarians are forced to get together and stand up and give their views and position on that specific subject. You force the politicians to address it. And in fact, in the UK system, there's this electoral map that shows where the different petitioners come from, right? So if you are an elected representative in a particular electorate, you see, oh my goodness, 5,000 of my voters have signed this petition. I had better support this and I had better see what I can do to deliver the outcome. So there's actually like a great connection there between the representative, elected officials and the individual voter. I think that's a really good bridge between direct and representative democracy. And I actually think the petition system that they have in the UK should be replicated elsewhere, including here in Australia. What I'll do is I'll leave a link in the description below so you can go see the UK petitions that are out there, some of the government responses, the electoral map, everything I'm discussing, and you can see how effective that is. And even if you aren't in the UK, petitions are basically used the same way by politicians just about everywhere in the world. So don't be shy, write, sign, put your name to a petition. Coming in at number 3, and this one I think is, I will be very reluctant to say. So this is a secret. Freedom of information requests. Now, before I go on, I would strongly urge you, before you lodge a freedom of information request, to contact the agency affected and ask them if they can just give you the information. Because a freedom of information request is a legal process. So as an individual citizen, you have the right to demand information from public agencies. They're your agencies. You are the taxpayer. Those public agencies are there to serve the public. So you are entitled to documents pertaining to their activities. That is your legal right. There are exemptions, of course, national security, commercial and confidence, those sorts of things. But by and large, most government records are accessible to you. The problem is that when you put in a freedom of information request, there is a massive process the agency has to go through, because it's not just giving you the information. It has to collect all the information, go through it in accordance with the Act, record it as a legal request. So there's all these documentations of, pertaining to this part of the Act and this exemption and all of the rest, going through each bit of material. So first of all, they have to get all of the information, which may not all be in one place. Then they have to hand it to lawyers to go through it and sort of see what is and what is not within the scope of the Act. Then they have to excise all the exempt material, personal names, things like that. And then after 30 days or so, they might release you the information you're after, or they might not, okay? If in the first instance, you go to your affected agency and say, look, I'd rather not put in a freedom of information request. Can you just tell me, how many people access this program in the last 12 months, right? Well, they'll probably just give it to you. Everybody lives. They want to give you the information you're after, and they do not want to go through the freedom of information process, because it is vastly more work than the requester will ever imagine it could be. So yes, but if you get no joy, if you write to the agency, look, can you tell me this information? And they say, no, I can't give you that information, then you do have the recourse for freedom of information request. And that is there to open governments. The freedom of information legislation is specifically designed to help members of the public access parts of government processes that they don't want to show people, that they would rather not see come to light. And so that is a powerful weapon that you have to effect change. Because look, the most effective way for a government agency or a government not to be caught with this sort of information is to change their policies. If they're making policies that people want, and if people are not upset and are not using freedom of information requests to access information, then everybody's happy. So freedom of information, now this is a tool not to overuse, because then it just clogs up the whole system for everybody. There's only a certain number of freedom of information requests that people could process, but it's an incredibly effective tool to get people to sit up and take notice. If someone is willing to put in a freedom of information request to find out particular, things on a part of government policy or government program, then you will be able to affect change, particularly if you reveal something that is embarrassing. And this is something that I have witnessed in the past, that if a government agency is forced to report something that is shows that a program has failed, then the chances of that changing are very high indeed. So, number 3, freedom of information. Coming in at number 2. Now, this is either number 2 or number 1, depending. Number 2, if you want to have an effect in general. Number 1, if there is something very specific you're interested in. If there's only one area of policy you want to change and you're generally not politically aware otherwise, then this is your best bet. And that is to write to a submission to a government inquiry. So if you go to, say, the Australian parliamentary website, but there are other similar websites for your own governments around the world, but I'll leave a link in the description, you will see parliamentary committees set up to cover different topics, whether it's foreign defence and trade, whether it's treaties, whether it's communications. There are these parliamentary committees set up by parliamentarians to review proposals and government legislation that impact different segments of the community. So there is very likely to be a government inquiry related to your area of interest. And what you do is you write a formal submission to that inquiry. It's a powerful tool for members of the public and public advocacy groups to effect change. Because what happens is they put out a terms of reference, you write your submission to the inquiry, the parliamentary agencies will review it and record it in a format that's useful for all of the politicians. And then you may even be called to testify before Parliament, before Congress, before the House, on all different subjects related to that thing that you have submitted. It's actually a powerful weapon to effect change. And I personally have testified before Parliament on numerous occasions. Everything from, online poker to, foreign treaties on the export of nuclear materials. Like, I have done this quite a bit. And I tell you what, if you know your stuff, if you've done the work, if you're persuasive in your arguments, politicians themselves will cite you in their final report that is a government report that goes before the parliament and affects the decision making, right? Whole countries can be swayed on this sort of stuff. So go to your parliamentary inquiries page, see what there is available, and it gets updated all the time. If you find that your particular area of interest isn't covered by any of the inquiries, then what I suggest you do is find who the members are of that committee and write to them and say that there should be. So let's say you're concerned about particular disability support services for, let's say, a rare disease of children. There's no inquiry on that because it doesn't come up very often. We'll write to the parliamentarians responsible and ask them to put it on there. They are absolutely able to set up these inquiries and often do at the request of electors. So do pursue that path. It's a very arcane, high-level government influence, but as an individual, you can have disproportionate impact on government policy, particularly if you then also join a relevant advocacy network. So let's say it's Alzheimer's policy and you go and join Alzheimer's Australia and you work with Alzheimer's Australia to develop an Alzheimer's Australia submission, okay? Well, that will be extremely thought-provoking for the parliamentarians, because they'll know that the peak body, the people who represent those most affected, have a particular point of view, and they will take that into strong consideration. So keep that in mind. And now for number one. The number one most effective way that you can affect change as an individual is join a political party. I know that this seems a bit obvious, right? But here is the thing. Decisions in governments, decisions of countries are made by the people who show up. And that is so important to remember, okay? It's not useful to sit there and complain on Twitter. What you need to do is to go and build a relationship with the political representatives. And they have two constituents. They have constituents who are the electors, the general members of the public, and they have their own party, who is another member of their constituency, because they're the ones who give the resources, the fundraising, the boots on the ground to deliver papers and things, to do the policy platform, to answer letters from various elected officials. It's these party activists who have the most influence on political leaders. And therefore, if you join a political party, you will have direct access to these politicians and be able to put your views forward. And this is something that is happening less and less. People are disaffected from politics. The major parties in Australia are having fewer and fewer members because they're being abandoned on both sides. But don't be one of those people. Be one of the people that if you care about government policy, if you want to affect change, if you have good ideas, then find the political party that most fits your political persuasion and join that party and get involved. And you'll be amazed at how much influence you can have if you're motivated, intelligent, thoughtful, respectful, and articulate. You'll be able to bring about significant change among your own political leaders. So that's my number one recommendation. Join a political party. But just recapping, number 5, write to your agency or political leaders and just remember that these letters are taken very seriously. Sign a petition or create a petition. Freedom of information, but put in a non-freedom of information request first. See how you go with that. That'll be much faster and much more appreciated. Number 2, write a submission to government inquiries. You may well find yourself testifying before Parliament. And number 1, join a political party. Those are my top 5 tips. If you have any more that you think is very useful, please let me know. Leave your comments down below. If you find this a valuable conversation, some of these advice and tips useful, please like and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any more videos. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.